Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Zenitsu, and we are back with another Digimon video. So today, I'm going to be doing another episode in underrated but awesome decks to play in the Digimon TCG. So, before I get into the actual decks this episode, if you're enjoying this type of content and you want to see more, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date when I upload or go live next, and feel free to tell me your thoughts about any of the decks down in the comments below. But just as a quick disclaimer, I do want to point out on what underrated actually means, because some people might not exactly understand what the definition of underrated is. So underrated is to basically underestimate the extent, value, or importance of someone or something. So for Digimon decks, this could just literally mean older decks that aren't seeing play, or bad decks, in quotation mark, that might be able to do some surprising things, or even decks that haven't necessarily topped in a large event in a while, but can still do well at the locals level. So those are mainly the types of decks that I'm going to be referring to when I'm talking about these decks being underrated. So keep in mind, not all of these are probably going to be super competitive, and I don't necessarily recommend that you're taking them to large events, but they're still decks that can be fun and reasonable to play nonetheless. So without further ado, let's kick it over to some of the decks and see what we're going to be looking at today. Alright, so the very first deck that we're going to be taking a look at today is going to be Examon. So Examon was literally just supported earlier this year, with BT20 offering us a whole new evolutionary line and package for Examon to work with, and that package is still going to be used, but we actually did get a new BT23 version of Examon to further support what the deck is trying to do, and the BT23 Examon is arguably the best Examon that we currently have. So what's making the deck super good is the fact that it is a DNA deck, so it's trying to basically line up two Digimon to DNA into our Examon as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can. And the cool thing about Examon is the fact that we actually have two different ways to be able to set this up. We could obviously use our level 6s, but sometimes getting into two separate level 6s to DNA is a little bit cumbersome, but that's where the beauty of the fact that we could use our level 5s to DNA into our Examon come into play. We do have to be careful with Examon Ace, because Examon Ace is more specifically asking for the Breaker and Slayer when it comes to his Blast DNA, but his normal DNA, we still can basically apply the same rules and just utilize the level 5 Digimon if we really wanted to. And that gives the deck some really good offensive and defensive potential, because the new Examon is an absolute beast of a card, because he actually has something that not a lot of things in the game currently have, which is going to be option removal. And when I mean option removal, I mean delayed option removal. So this could really mess with the opponent's tempo if you're able to get into your Examon before the opponent is able to execute on their overall game plan and strategy, and then they're forced to look at an Examon beating them in the face, which is already pretty threatening, because Examon can deal pretty decent damage at times, especially in combination with a lot of the other effects that are going to be going on in the deck. And we also do even have an Examon X antibody to act as an additional evolution point to try to push the control and pressure even further if we really wanted to. But most of the time, you're probably just going to be settling by sitting on an Examon. And we also do have the potential of an Examon Ace, so you could even play some mind games with your opponent if you're trying to ace bait the opponent into a play by utilizing your level 6 Digimon. And the BT20 level 6 Digimon are actually pretty strong at doing what they want to do, so why not support them a little bit more? And that's kind of why we're even thinking about running a cute tech card like Hina, is because it basically interacts with our level 5s and our level 6s, so that we could double up on basically their Wind Digivolving ability and be able to get their Wind Digivolving ability and their on play ability as well. So that's going to make some of our level 6s even more powerful than what the opponent might be anticipating or expecting, while also being able to give us a little bit of extra memory as a result, because you can never have too much memory, especially since a lot of our cards are a little bit on the expensive side and we don't have that many ways to reduce the overall cost of the cards that we're going to be using. But when it comes to Examon, because of the colors that he's playing in, that's why Davis is still the best tamer for the deck, because it's also a good consistency tool. And speaking of consistency tools, we do have a couple of memory boosts that we could leverage that are going to basically search for pretty much anything and everything inside of the deck. But the core and heart of the deck is still just mostly going to be utilizing a lot of the BT20 cards to try to be as efficient getting up into our Examon. And the best card that we got from BT21 that's going to support our Examon deck is actually the Dracomon X, because it gives us that ever so coveted ability where it allows us to DNA at the end of our turn, making going into our Examon even easier than ever before. And we do have tons of Dracomon that we're going to be using. Obviously, the best one is going to be the EX3 Dracomon, because it's just the best and easiest searcher. It's in 2 colors, and it just interacts with everything in the deck. But when it comes to the other Dracomon, you can kind of just run whatever you feel like based on how your deck is lining up and the abilities you want to try to use to support your Examon. So because I'm using Davis, because I'm using Jade Memory Boost, just as an example, I want to try to make my deck as consistent as possible, which is why I'm going to be running a blue Dracomon, even though, yes, there is a red Dracomon, and because of that, if you're running red Dracomon, then you might want to change Jade Memory Boost to like Wisteria Memory Boost or something. So you can see how small changes can impact how you want to go about building the deck. But for the most part, that is kind of just the majority of the deck, is just trying to leverage the BT20 cards to be super effective at lining up our evolutions to go up into an Examon, and then use our Examon to try to control the field and try to stall out the opponent by removing some of their potential options that they bother to set up and take their time setting up, and that anti-tempo is going to sometimes be enough to really put the opponent in a bad position, which is what's making Examon a very unique deck for the current meta environment. And while we're on the subject of option removal being pretty good, this next deck is definitely a fan favorite for a lot of people, and it isn't necessarily the easiest deck to build or play, but it's still a really fun and rewarding deck when it goes off nonetheless, and that's going to be Justimon. So Justimon is also one of the few decks in the entire game interacting with removing delayed based options. Granted, it half the time, or the majority of the time, just wants to remove its own options because it's working with kind of like a Sakuyamon type of effect where you're trying to set up these delayed based options just for Justimon to delete so you could gain a whole bunch of value for the options being removed. Granted, most of the time it's probably just more effective if you can just to remove the opponents, because again, that anti-tempo aspect on them wanting to use that type of effect and now they basically lose that effect is a really big devastating blow towards the opponent. And Justimon being a traditional stack deck means that we do have lots of good consistency tools for the deck to run, and it also has a lot of really good trait-based cards that you could play inside of the deck. So I'm electing to use Marvin because it cares about machines and cyborgs, which Justimon is a cyborg. So this is going to allow us to give our Justimon jamming, which is really important because our primary way that we're going to be aggressing is utilizing Justimon Excel Arm to be able to give us a whole bunch of really good offensive abilities like Security Attack +1 and Piercing to deal a lot of damage. The only issue is the deck doesn't really have good ways of boosting its own DP. Granted, yes, it does have a lot of devices that are trying to fill in those gaps, but if we could just not do that, and as long as the opponent doesn't have a way to wall us out, then we could do some really decent damage, especially since the deck does have access to Digivolve. And the deck also has really good offensive and defensive playlines, again, because of just how some of these devices are working and what we're trying to do. So we're mostly just trying to leverage going up into a Justimon and trying to use our Justimon form changes to swap into whatever form that we want. The primary one, like I said, is going to be Justimon XL Arm, the promo one. One of the other big important ones, especially for dealing as much damage as possible and gaining access at the additional ability to attack in case we need to rebuild our stack relatively quickly, is going to be Justimon X Antibody. Then we also do have Justimon Ace as a really good card that we could just hard play for cheap or just sit on a Cybergermon and try to ace bait the opponent. We don't exactly have a whole lot of ways to force them to attack that's native to the deck, but it's still a very strong Justimon card for us to utilize that's working with all of the other mechanics that our cards are interacting with. And then we also do have a new Justimon Blitzarm from BT23 that also is another really good inclusion for the deck as well as another possible form change. Then when it comes to just some of the devices, you can kind of just run whatever devices you feel like you want to run because we do have a lot of them and the deck does reward us for utilizing a lot of them. I personally think that the pawn device is one of the primary devices that the deck wants to use as not only just a good consistency tool, but an alternative way to gain memory for triggering some of our other devices without us removing our own cards, so that way we could remove the opponent's cards while still having a way to gain all of the benefits from our other devices. Then Queen device is a really good control style device. Otherwise, you could just run something like a bishop or another rook, or even a knight device if you really wanted to. King device is another fantastic device at resetting up our devices. And I'm just running rook device because it's in the color of black, and I'm playing Izzy as the primary memory setter for the deck, so that way we could try to be a little bit more efficient with our cards. And this is one of the cheaper memory setting tamers because if it's checking all black cards, which the majority of the deck outside of the devices are black, then we get to gain a memory, so it's effectively costing us 3 to hard play this card versus the 4. So that's going to be really important at trying to maintain as much tempo as possible. Just because we're also playing with a lot of devices, we also have the Ryu Tamer that's interacting with the devices from BT19, and the majority of the deck is basically just going to be the BT19 core mixed with the BT23 core because those are probably the two best cores that's interacting with how the deck wants to function. So we're splashing in a little bit of EX8 for some of the other X antibodies because one of the most powerful X antibodies that the deck has access to is obviously Cybergermon X antibody because D-Digivolve is really, really powerful. Trashing the opponent's security is also really, really powerful, and it also can remove options on the field, which again is really, really powerful. So there is like some flexibility in terms of the different types of Digimon that you could run in terms of what's going to better support the deck. And it's always encouraged that you do mix up and change the decks from what you see here, because just because I like playing the deck in one particular way doesn't mean that that's going to be good or optimal, and it could just be better played in a different fashion. Like, I do know there was a lot of experimentation with what Justimon can do in terms of all of his form changes, in terms of just trying to get a Justimon out quickly and efficiently. So some people were using like Dark Masters type engines to try to ace bait the opponent and get Justimon out that way, and then just Digivolve and do all the crazy stuff. And I've seen a lot of different experimentations with what Justimon can do, but I figured a more traditional stack-based version is going to be what a lot of people are looking for, especially newer players that are just entering the game, because this is just a very simple and easy way to be able to approach deck building for a lot of decks that can do this. And I think that, like, he has a lot of potential that's definitely untapped because he has a lot of different ways to be able to OTK because of the form changes that he has and because of the traits and archetypes that he could play with. There's definitely a lot of room for experimentation in terms of what is a good way to approach playing Justimon. Justimon isn't the only deck that's ripe for experimentation because The last deck that I'm going to be talking about is going to be Hunters, and Hunters over the years definitely had a lot of experimentation and still has a good amount of experimentation going on inside of it because of all of the different mechanics and traits that this deck is able to reach, which makes it a pretty rich deck in terms of the different ways that we could approach deck building overall. Ideally, the way Hunters wants to play is you're going to be really aggressive and low to the ground because you don't need to run any high-level Digimon. Obviously, you could if you really wanted to, but the level 5s are going to be doing the majority of the brunt work because the level 5s, in terms of Justimon Superior Mode, do have ways to basically give us some extra attacks. So the new one allows us to attack when we Digivolve without suspending, and then obviously we could attack normally after that. And the old one allows us at the end of our turn to attack without suspending, which means we could attack more proactively with the card. So it doesn't necessarily matter which one that we're going to be using. We're just using them as basically level 5 Digimon that are able to hit way above their weight class, acting like pseudo level 6 Digimon. But the big important thing of the deck is resource management, because the whole idea is once we go up into our level 5 Digimon, we're committing a lot of resources into that level 5 Digimon that we're not necessarily going to get back super easily, because almost all of our cards on the level 4 and lower do have the save mechanic, so that means when they die, they basically get to hide underneath our tamer, so that way we could use them underneath our tamer for various different purposes. So the more traditional way that Hunters wants to play is using something like Tagaru to be able to use the cards to reduce the Digivolution cost, so that way it's easier to go up into our higher stage Digimon through a more traditional method, but because of the interaction with the U Amano Tamer more specifically, we could utilize something like the old BT10 U Amano, which synergizes really nicely with the Hunters deck because it's another tamer that cares about having Digimon be put underneath it. It's going to give us some extra memory in card draw when Digimon are going to be going underneath, which the majority of the Digimon in this deck are going to be purple, so it works just fine. And the fact that this card also allows us to basically have access at fake Digicross means that we actually have access at hard playing our Digimon for relatively cheap. So we just try to toolbox the different types of abilities with our level 4 Digimon, and then our level 3 Digimon are mostly going to be like resource and value engine type cards, allowing us to basically try to filter through our hand and deck as quickly as we possibly can. We could not only just keep up the pressure against the opponent, but have access to the deep toolbox that our level 4s and level 5s are going to be giving us. And obviously, consistency is king, and the more consistent we can make the deck, the better it's going to perform overall. And having a lot of card draw, especially on our lower levels, is really, really good, so that way we could try to make the deck as consistent as possible. So that's kind of Hunters in a quick nutshell. It still does have a lot of the same weaknesses that it kind of has had for a while, so anything that doesn't delete your Digimon really puts the deck in a bad position, and especially anything that's able to delete the Tamers is definitely going to be really, really harmful for the deck overall, which is the big thing that's kind of held it back, and I think it still is a really fine and strong aggressive deck for where the game currently is, but outside of that, I think that this trio of decks is a really fun and interesting batch that gives you a lot of build variety and play variety in terms of what the Digimon card game is offering. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope that you found this video to be enjoyable, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Later!